I was enslaved by my family and kicked out of my home. What happened next will surprise you. I never imagined my life could change so quickly. My name is Julia, I'm 17 years old, and I grew up in a home that seemed normal to the outside world, but to me was suffocating. For years, I was treated as an extension of my parents, Emmanuel and Laura, babysitting my 4 siblings without ever receiving a thank you or any recognition. My childhood and adolescence were filled with the feeling of being trapped, of never being a priority, always responsible for household chores and caring for others, while my parents continued their routines, oblivious to my exhaustion. I learned to swallow my anger, sadness, and feelings of injustice, but that didn't erase the knot in my stomach that I felt every time I woke up. My siblings, Miguel, Emma, Lucas, and Sophia, were the only people who gave me small doses of affection, and even then, I felt alone. The routine was overwhelming, and I became accustomed to denying myself. The feeling of being constantly on alert, as if any mistake could cost me more than I deserved, stayed with me day and night. I remember the butterflies in my stomach and the constant tension, even when I tried to distract myself with studies or small temporary escapes, because I knew that at some point my parents would call, demanding that I forget my desires and prioritize only the house and the care of my siblings. The first spark of change came when I started working at the neighborhood coffee shop. It wasn't much, but it gave me something I'd never felt before: autonomy. The smell of coffee, the sound of the machines, the routine of serving customers. It all felt like a parallel world to my home. For the first time, I had my own money and, more importantly, the feeling that my choices could matter. But my parents reacted as if I'd committed a crime. Emmanuel was irritated, complaining that I was disobeying and abandoning responsibilities, and Laura remained silent, but with that disapproving look that always weighed on me. One night, after a particularly intense disagreement, I was kicked out of the house. I remember the moment exactly. I was clutching my backpack, my eyes burning with tears, and each step to the door felt overwhelming. I felt a deep emptiness, mixed with fear and relief. Fear of having nowhere to go, of being rejected, but relief at finally freeing myself, however abruptly, from that space that suffocated me. My life had turned upside down in seconds, and I realized that I could no longer depend on them, that I needed to fight for myself, even without knowing exactly how. Moving wasn't easy. I lived with my grandparents, Nusa and Ricardo, who welcomed me with open arms and huge hearts. But still, the fear of failure lingered. Every morning, I woke up remembering Emmanuel's cold gaze and Laura's indifference, and I felt like giving up. The first few days were filled with tears, doubts, and insecurity. I had to learn to cook for myself, organize myself, and balance school and work in a way I'd never had to before. Nusa kept reminding me that I didn't need to carry the guilt of being exploited, and Ricardo always said that my intelligence and courage were greater than I imagined. Little by little, I began to feel that I wasn't alone and that my choices could have value. Still, there were days when anger returned with a vengeance, reminding me of the manipulation and neglect I'd suffered. The emotional toll was heavy. Sometimes I'd find myself waking up in the middle of the night, my heart racing, wondering how my parents might react or if my siblings were okay. Anxiety and feelings of inadequacy plagued me constantly, but something inside me began to shift. The desire to prove to myself that I could be more than they led me to believe began to overcome the fear. The turning point began when I met Professor Rodriguez at school. She was the first person to truly encourage me to pursue scholarships and academic opportunities. I remember the day she called me in for a chat after class. She looked me in the eye and told me, with a confidence I'd never felt before, that I had the potential for great things and that I couldn't settle for less. At that moment, I felt a mixture of shame and hope because I knew she was right, but I was also afraid of failing. I began studying diligently, using every free minute to learn, research, and prepare for exams. At the same time, I balanced my work at the cafeteria and tried to stay in touch with my brothers, who were my emotional anchor. There were endless nights of studying, silent tears, days when everything felt too much and my self-esteem seemed to vanish. But every small achievement, every good grade, every compliment from teachers and friends reminded me that I was capable of changing my story. I discovered that the greatest strength came not from the absence of fear, but from the ability to continue even when it was present, and that seeking help, accepting love and guidance was not a sign of weakness, but of courage. In this process, My friends Megan and Casey were fundamental. They were there for me during the hardest moments, when the longing and pain became unbearable. We spent hours talking about my dreams, about the feeling of always fighting against something invisible, and about the injustice of having been exploited at home. I remember one afternoon in particular. I sat on the sidewalk, my body heavy with exhaustion, tears streaming down my face, and Megan held my hand, telling me that I didn't have to face everything alone. It was the first time I felt someone believed in me without expecting anything in return, and it changed my perception of myself. I realized that I could trust, support myself, and, most importantly, I deserved respect and care. Every conversation, every laugh, every simple gesture from these friends reminded me that my life could be different, that I wasn't doomed to repeat the cycle of exploitation. Little by little, I began to feel that my voice had value, that my choices could have real consequences, and that life could offer me opportunities if I was willing to seek them. This block of internal and external changes, of pain and small victories, was crucial for me to realize that, despite everything, I had the power to write my own story. Adjusting to my new life with my grandparents brought challenges I hadn't anticipated. Although Nusa and Ricardo were incredible, there was a silent pressure on me not to fail. Each day required me to wake up early, study, help around the house, and still keep my job at the coffee shop. Physical fatigue mixed with emotional exhaustion. My body felt heavy, my back ached, my feet swollen from so much walking, and at the same time, my heart tightened with longing and fear. But little by little, I learned to organize my routine, to delegate some tasks effectively, and to realize that small daily victories were signs of progress. Each morning I managed to wake up without the weight of guilt showed me that it was possible to rebuild my life. It was a slow but steady process, and I began to realize that freedom came with responsibility, and that being responsible for myself could be liberating, even if painful. One of the most memorable moments of this period was receiving my first acceptance letter to a scholarship program. I remember sitting in the living room, my hands trembling, as my grandparents looked on hopefully, and tearing open the envelope with almost reverent care. When I read the words confirming my achievement, I felt something I'd never experienced before. Genuine pride, not just for what I'd done, but for what I'd overcome to get there. It was as if all the tears, sleepless nights, feelings of injustice and fear had been rewarded by that moment of validation. The feeling that my efforts had genuine value gave me an inner strength I hadn't known existed. At the same time, I thought about my parents and the way they treated me. I felt anger, sadness, and also a slight sense of silent revenge, but soon realized that my focus couldn't be on them, but on myself. This balance between anger, memory, and ambition became part of my emotional routine, and I learned to channel negative feelings into energy for growth. During this time, my siblings continued to be my safe haven. Even with the forced distance, I kept in touch with Miguel, Emma, Lucas, and Sophia, who sent me messages, told me about their routines, and, most importantly, reminded me that I didn't have to carry the weight of the world alone. Every call and every conversation was a small injection of courage. Knowing that they still trusted me, that they saw me as a sister and a role model, strengthened my resolve. At the same time, this bond reminded me of the wounds I carried. I felt anger at the way our parents treated us, and sadness at having lost moments that would never return. But, instead of paralyzing me, this mixture of love and indignation drove me. I wanted to set a different example for them, to show them that even in the most unfair circumstances, it's possible to fight, grow, and achieve something better. This realization began to give me the strength to face each day, even when it seemed impossible to continue. There were days when I almost gave up. I remember a rainy afternoon, sitting on my bed in my room, hugging my knees, my thoughts swirling. I felt like I had no energy to study, work, or even take care of myself. I thought about my parents, the injustice of life, and the feeling of abandonment I'd carried for years. But it was in that moment of despair that I realized I couldn't let myself sink. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and remembered everything I'd overcome: the sleepless nights caring for my siblings, the hidden tears, the feeling of not being enough. I decided, right then and there, that I could no longer let myself be defined by what happened to me, but by what I would do next. That moment was crucial. I realized that change depended on me, on my decisions, and on the courage to put myself first. Even through fear and pain, rebuilding didn't happen overnight. It was made up of small steps, mistakes, and successes. I had to learn to deal with my parents' anger, the anxiety of studying and working, and doubts about my abilities. Each morning was an exercise in persistence, each night an opportunity for reflection. I made mistakes. I missed deadlines, overdid tasks, overextended myself at times, and neglected my health at others. But I also got things right. I made true friends, dedicated myself to my studies, learned to organize myself, and began to understand that the support of my family and friends was a solid foundation. Little by little, I realized that my life didn't need to be defined by my painful past. I could choose my path, and the feeling of control over my choices was liberating. Each achievement, no matter how small, reinforced the certainty that I could, indeed, write a different story for myself and my siblings, and that the pain I carried didn't need to stop me from achieving my dreams. As I gained confidence and independence, I noticed my parents were beginning to show signs of regret. Emmanuel, previously always authoritarian, began secretly calling me, asking how I was, trying to get closer in a strange and uncomfortable way. Laura also showed genuine concern, albeit belatedly, wanting to know if I was okay and if my brothers missed me. I confess that at first, their every gesture left me confused, and anger came along with the doubt. Should I accept this contact or keep my distance? It was a process of constant evaluation, of learning to set boundaries, of realizing that forgiving didn't mean forgetting, and that my priority needed to be my well-being. Experience taught me that not every regret immediately changes the past, but that acknowledging a mistake is the first step to rebuilding relationships. I learned to deal with these contradictory feelings, to validate my own emotions, and to understand that even in family relationships, respect and autonomy must be preserved. My study routine intensified. Each scholarship I received was the result of dedication, sleepless nights, and patience. I remember spending hours researching, writing essays, studying languages and math, always afraid I wouldn't make it. But each achievement strengthened me. My body felt tired, but my mind was more alert and my heart felt lighter. Professor Rodriguez's support was essential. She not only guided me academically, but also motivated me emotionally. Every time she said, "You can do it," I felt it wasn't just encouragement, but confirmation that my story could be different. I realized it wasn't just about achieving external things, like scholarships and grades, but about realizing that each effort brought me closer to being the person I wanted to be: independent, resilient, and confident. Megan and Casey continued to be with me every step of the way. In the most difficult moments, when the emotional weight was almost unbearable, they were there to listen, hold me, and remind me that I was capable. Once, after an extremely exhausting week, I sat with them in the park, my hands trembling, and cried out everything I had accumulated over the past few months. They didn't use cliches. They simply listened and let me feel the pain. It was in this welcoming space that I realized something important. We don't have to face everything alone. Having people who support us doesn't diminish our strength. On the contrary, it gives us the courage to keep going, even when life seems unfair. Little by little, life began to reward me in ways I never imagined. I secured important scholarships, began to plan my future clearly, and most importantly, began to feel at ease with my choices. I remember looking in the mirror and realizing that, for the first time, I saw someone who wasn't defined solely by the past or what others expected of me. The feeling of autonomy and control over my life was overwhelming, mixed with deep gratitude for my grandparents, friends, and teachers who supported me. The pain was still there, but I was able to transform it into learning and fuel to continue growing. A defining moment was the first school meeting my parents attended after the entire conflict. I was nervous, my heart racing, my body tense, and my palms sweating. But as I looked at them, I realized my focus wasn't on confronting them, but rather on showing them how much I had grown. I spoke confidently about my studies, my achievements, and my plans, feeling every word like a declaration of autonomy. They listened, surprised, and I could tell they were finally seeing the daughter who had always existed beyond the nanny I had been. I felt a mixture of relief, pride, and even a certain comfort, because the feeling of being recognized as a person, not as a servant or an extension of the family, was liberating. There, I realized that, despite the wounds, life could offer new opportunities, and that overcoming obstacles wasn't just about me, but about changing the dynamics of my own story. Rebuilding my self-esteem wasn't linear. There were days when I felt capable of conquering the world, and others when the memory of exploitation and neglect crushed me. I remember one night sitting on the porch of my grandparents' house, feeling the cold wind on my face and crying uncontrollably. Each tear carried anger, pain, but also hope. At that moment, I realized that feeling all of this wasn't a weakness, but part of the healing process. I needed to accept my emotions, learn from them, and transform them into strength. It was during this period that I began writing about my story, like a personal diary, recording every triumph, every failure, and every reflection. This act of letting it all out helped me organize my thoughts, recognize my own growth, and recognize that my pain had value but didn't need to define me. At work at the coffee shop, I began to see myself differently. Before, it was just an obligation, something I did to escape the routine at home. Now, it was a space for learning and independence. I could smell the fresh coffee, hear the customers' hurried orders, and even tired, there was something rewarding in knowing my effort was yielding results. Every note counted, every compliment received, reminded me that I could be competent, trustworthy, and valued. The feeling of achieving something with my own hands, of being responsible for my own livelihood and growth, was indescribable. Gradually, I realized that work wasn't just a financial obligation, but also a way to assert my autonomy and rebuild my self-esteem. My relationship with my siblings also strengthened. I'd always kept in touch, but now the conversations were different. We shared laughs, advice, and even small confidences, as if we were forging a bond that had previously been stifled by our parents. Miguel would seek me out to talk about school, Emma would share friends' secrets, Lucas and Sophia would send me drawings and loving messages. Their every gesture reminded me that familial love could exist, even if distant and imperfect. I learned to cherish these bonds, to protect them, and not allow my parents' neglect to destroy the connection we had. This gave me the motivation to move forward, even in moments when homesickness was overwhelming and the feeling of injustice seemed unbearable. I realized that sometimes true family isn't just about raising children, but also about supporting, loving, and being there. There were moments of regret and reflection on my past. I asked myself, why did I let this happen for so long? Why did I accept exploitation without fighting back? But over time, I learned that it wasn't my fault. The responsibility lay with those who should protect and value me. This realization was liberating. I began to forgive myself, to look at myself with compassion, and to recognize that surviving and fighting were already extraordinary feats. Understanding this gave me a new perspective on life, that even when we are treated unfairly, we have the ability to rebuild ourselves, to seek support, and to transform pain into learning. This realization became an emotional foundation that allowed me to face future challenges with greater courage and clarity. Aunt Barbara entered my life at this time as a bridge of reconciliation. She talked to my parents, showing them the real impact of their actions and encouraging sincere changes. This not only helped reduce conflict, but also allowed me to observe that even people who were previously hostile can recognize their mistakes and try to make amends. The experience taught me that justice doesn't have to be vengeful. It often comes from conscious choices to improve, change, and support. Seeing my parents, albeit timidly, begin to change their attitudes reinforced the certainty that my effort, courage, and determination were not in vain. I was finally reaping the rewards of my resilience and discovering that overcoming is not just about surviving, but also about allowing others to learn and grow alongside you. At 18, looking back, I realize how much I've grown and how much I've fought to find my place. I went from a teenager who felt invisible and exploited to someone capable of making decisions, setting goals, and fighting for her own dreams. Every scholarship I won, every compliment from Professor Rodriguez, every word of encouragement from Megan and Casey, every smile from my siblings reminded me of the journey I've traveled. I still feel pain when I think about the past, but that pain no longer paralyzes me. It has become fuel, reminding me of what I've overcome and what I can still achieve. Today, I understand that life doesn't have to be perfect to be valuable, and that our strength isn't measured by the absence of difficulties, but by the ability to keep going, to seek support, and to believe in ourselves. Reuniting with my parents remains a delicate matter. Emmanuel and Laura still carry their flaws, but I see genuine changes. Our relationship isn't perfect, but now there's respect and understanding. I've learned to set boundaries and recognize that my autonomy doesn't depend on their approval. This emotional maturity has brought me peace. I can feel grateful for their efforts without forgetting the hurts of the past. This awareness makes me stronger because now my happiness isn't tied to the approval of those who once exploited me, but to my own ability to live according to my principles and goals. I've discovered that forgiving and moving forward is an act of self-love, and that resilience is more than just enduring. It's transforming pain into learning. Today, I work, study, and continue to cultivate friendships and family ties that truly strengthen me. Every challenge I face reminds me that nothing comes without effort, but also that every achievement is the result of the courage to not give up. When I look at my grandparents, I see the unconditional support that allowed me to get back on my feet. When I look at my friends, I see the importance of having people who believe in you even when you doubt yourself. And when I look at myself, I see someone who faced abandonment, manipulation, and injustice, but found the strength to create a dignified life full of learning, love, and possibilities. This realization is liberating and gives me hope that I can continue growing, even in the face of any adversity. Sharing my story online is a step I've taken to inspire others who, like me, have felt trapped, invisible, or exploited. I want them to know that it's possible to change, rebuild, and achieve, even when everything seems lost. There's no magic formula. There's dedication, courage, seeking support, and above all, the decision to believe in yourself. Life is full of challenges, but also opportunities for growth. Writing these words, my heart feels lighter, because I know my experience can serve as an example that pain doesn't have to be the end, and that there's always a path, even if narrow and full of obstacles, to a more just and happy life. Looking ahead, I know I will still face challenges, and that some wounds will never completely disappear. But now, they don't define me. Today, I choose my life, my steps, and my achievements. I discovered that overcoming adversity isn't just about getting there, but about living the process of rebuilding, valuing, and freeing yourself. I know my story is proof that even in the most difficult circumstances, it's possible to resist, fight, and triumph. For anyone reading this, I want to leave a clear message. Your pain doesn't have to be eternal. You deserve support, love, and respect, and the strength to transform your life is already within you. I'm Julia, and I managed to turn things around. If I could do it, you can too.